Did you just get a new mountain bike? Well, before you go hit the trails, you want to get your suspension set up. And the first thing you want to do is dial in your air pressure and sag. Now, as a general rule, the less sag you have, the firmer your suspension will feel, and the more sag you have, the softer it'll feel. Too soft, and you risk bottoming out. Too firm, and your suspension might feel harsh. What we want to do is find the perfect balance between those two extremes. Now, usually we recommend riders set up their forks with about 20 to 25% sag and their rear shocks with about 25 to 30% sag. And it's super easy to do. All you need is a shock pump and a ruler or a tape measure that can measure millimeters. Before we get started, make sure to put on your riding gear. That means helmets, backpacks, pads, shoes, anything that'll add weight to your body because those will affect your sag numbers. Now let's start by setting the sag on our fork. What we're gonna do is make sure your fork is in the open position and not locked out, and push the O-ring on the fork stanchion against the seal of the fork. Now lean your bike against a wall or have a friend hold it up for you. Step onto the bike and get into the attack position. This is the position you'll be in while descending or pedaling hard out of the saddle. When you do this, your fork should sag. Now get off the bike without disturbing the position of the O-ring. What you want to do is measure the distance from the seal to the O-ring in millimeters. Take this number and divide it by the travel of your fork, and that'll give you the percent sag. If you want to adjust this, you're going to need to use your shock pump. Unscrew the valve cover on the left fork leg of your fork. Screw on the shock pump and add air if you want to decrease sag, or release air using the release valve to increase sag. Repeat the sag test until you get your desired sag number. Next, we're gonna set sag for our rear shock. You essentially do the same thing, make sure your shock is open and not locked out, and then we usually suggest riders set up the rear shock while seated. But if you're riding a downhill or enduro bike and do a lot of descending, you might wanna set up your sag while standing in the attack position. Push the O-ring against the seal of the shock. Get on your bike and let the rear shock sag. Step off without disturbing the position of the O-ring and measure the distance from the seal to the O-ring. You want to divide this number in millimeters by the stroke length of your shock in millimeters. If the stroke length of your shock isn't printed on your shock, you might have to look it up online. If you have a Fox shock, you can look up the 4-digit code on Fox's website. Again, if you want to adjust your sag, you're going to need to screw on your shock pump and add air to reduce sag or let air out to increase sag. Once you get this dialed in, you are ready to go. Make sure to bring a shock pump on your first ride so you can adjust things if they aren't quite right. You can play around, find what sag really works for you, and then after your sag is dialed in, the next step is getting your rebound dialed. So make sure to watch our rebound video too. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.